Chapter 12. Once Norman had explained how they could get in, Dmitri felt comfortable enough to tell him the trade secret for getting back out again. All right, easy enough. The trick is not to let the cameras see you've done anything wrong, of course. So, you straighten over the locker, you open the locker, without the camera being able to see your hands, and then what? You're not expecting the locker's contents to be so bulky, say, or some other contingency. We don't know what will arise, but we know no one ever brings bags to a locker they then unlock, unless it's small shopping bags from the day out, inconsequential. No, they take bags out of the locker, so we sew into the lining of the coat we wear a long pocket. Norman had always wondered how Dmitri managed to get away from the scene of the crime so often unobserved. They spent the evening sewing together. It was important, Dmitri explained, that all the pockets they added to their jackets should be over the chest on the inside of the jacket's front panels. This way, they could shield from the cameras whatever it was they were packing away into the pockets by subtly pulling the chest of their jackets to one side, in case the contents of the locker themselves should arouse a CCTV attendant's suspicions. But it wasn't odd enough to be immediately counted criminal to stuff one's jackets with odds and ends left in a locker. They could also, hopefully, better shield their faces this way. They'll get a record of us going in, though. They have forward-facing cameras at the entry, Norman warned. There was no way to avoid these, unless they took a hammer to some back window panes and risked being charged with destruction of property. All right. Dmitri didn't like the idea of leaving proof they'd been there. I tell you what, in case anything happens, come here now. What type of lockers does the luggage room have? Old-fashioned key lockers they started out as, but they added an override for an electronic ticket system. You know, you put the ticket in, it opens the locker, but they still have little keyholes on each of the lockers. Yeah, they've got that for emergencies, just in case. Weird. Okay, that makes our job easier. Two-pronged approach. I'll show you how to do this in case anything goes wrong. You can complete the job, yes? So, first, you take this tension wrench. All right. Norman learned hesitantly. His fingers were too gnarled to be truly expert at manipulating lockpicks, but he managed at length to open a standard lock using the keyhole in its back. Good, very good. Now, the ones at the station may be a bit more difficult, depending on if the electric system overrides the old locking system. For those, you must jimmy in from the side. This, Dmitri explained, was known as an emergency lock override, and may require them to take off the metal faceplate that concealed the fancy new system electronically sealing the luggage lockers. But at the end of the day, inserting a key, even if said key was in fact only composed of a lockpick and a tension wrench, would still be required. So, now you can finish the job if you really want to. You can keep the kit. Dmitri handed it over. Oh, no, that's all right. I'd like both of us to be carrying incriminating evidence. Dmitri had been through the legal system a number of times. He knew the importance of bargaining chips, and an ex-cop who had turned to lockpicking wouldn't look good for the Glover police force at all. Dmitri might be able to walk free should anything go wrong, on the strength alone of the fact that he knew Norman had entered a luggage locker with lockpicking equipment and plausible intent. All right, well, hopefully everything will go smoothly. Norman had proposed they wait until night, a sentiment with which Dmitri entirely agreed. Nighttime meant sleepier attendance, especially in a regional train station where little through traffic promised minimal excitement. The West End train station, though small, was at least large enough to be considered slightly more important than the average regional hub. It had a long galley of fast food restaurants, clothing stores, and bookstores, attached to the atrium past which one could gain access to the rail tracks. At night, these had all been closed, but for one or two of the restaurants. Under dingy fluorescence, Dmitri and Norman passed by the last open fast food restaurant, closed camera shops, and the coin-operated turnstiles that would enable one to enter the pristine marble confines of a bank of showers, open for rent, receiving 2 rental towels as well, all for the price of $2.97. The entryway to the locker rooms was beside the rental showers. Heightened security over the years had required these lockers to be encased in glass. One couldn't get in without first subjecting any baggage or coats to the interior of an X-ray machine. Dmitri came first, compliantly stepping through the metal detector beside the X-ray machine. His lockpicks he hid in his wallet. They could pass as keys, but to save time, wallets were habitually excluded from the screening process anyway. He made eye contact with the sole attendant on the other side of the X-ray's readout and nodded. The jacket he passed through the X-ray machine showed nothing unusual in its makeup. About 5 minutes later, Norman showed up. They relied on timing their entries to seem unrelated, so that the cameras at the front of the glass casement round the locker rooms wouldn't pick up an ex-cop and an ex-con, presumably traveling together. Norman had budgeted in the 5-minute window by which he delayed his own arrival, by considering how long it usually took him to find a luggage ticket in one of his own coat pockets, once he had redonned all his clothes after passing through metal detectors. Added to this, Dmitri could also stall, until Norman arrived to partake in aiding the accomplishment of their crime, by fumbling with the change machine, set to one side of the luggage room's interior. Dmitri headed over to this red and grey machine now, and began feeding it a 10-euro note, waiting for coins to trickle out of its side. He would not, of course, be using the coins to retrieve whatever was in Rene's locker, but the jangle in his pockets, were he to collect enough of them, could hardly be construed as suspicious. Norman was just redonning his jacket by the time the change machine in the wall had finally given Dmitri a proper amount of loose cash. Dmitri! Norman pretended to see him for the first time. Ensuring their gestures and body language looked natural would be of the utmost importance for tricking the cameras. "Norman, fancy seeing you here. You know that little son of a bitch," he meant the change machine, "in there gave me all 20-cent pieces, 10 euros worth, little bastard." Norman needn't have worried their lock-picking would take longer than the average time it took a patron to slip coins down the slot by a locker, not if the average patron had to deal with paying using 20-cent pieces to gradually accrue a cash balance at least equal to 10 euros for each hour they'd left their luggage in the locker. Norman usually brought his own change, in convenient 50-cent pieces, precisely to avoid having to deal with the wall-mounted change machine altogether, but the existence of that systemic inconvenience would actually work in their favor now. Dmitri turned down the corridor to the long-term luggage lockers a step ahead of Norman. "Did you case this place?" "Yeah, I came here every Sunday for about the last 5 years of my life." "Yeah? Well, they've added a new security camera." Dmitri nodded subtly, not daring to point. Norman couldn't turn. He could only pivot and side-eye the long glass panel adjacent the long-term lockers. Sure enough, the blink of a red recording light could be seen through the tinted window. Shit. "So now what? You're staying with me while I open my own locker, without opening one of your own?" Dmitri thought he could sense a sting operation, some form of entrapment. "Of course, why not? Catching up for old time's sake. We can make that stick. They haven't got anything on us. I'll stand between it and you." Norman scratched his neck casually, and leant against the locker that stood adjacent number 264. He could always say befriending Dmitri was part of Servway's visitor volunteer outreach program. "Yes, but now we can't dismantle the locker to get to the manual override deep inside. The camera would notice 2 men shifting sheets of metal around." "Can you override the central electronic monitor in any other way? Could we just pay, even if we don't have a ticket?" Could be. Dmitri slipped a knife between the side of locker 264's door and the column of metal that housed the automated payment system that was meant to receive customers' tickets. They were in luck. He could feel his knife slide up the thin metal plate covering the locker's coin slot back towards the center of the locker's door, enabling payment to be pushed down the slot by bypassing the computer that required a ticket in order to push the coin slot's plate out of the way. "So, if we put coins in, we can just pay and it'll open." "Yes, but hurry." "No, wait, straighten up. I saw a sign that said 50's the maximum charge. That's how much they'd probably end up having to pay. I'll get more change and pay you back for the 20. We'll say you didn't have enough to cover the fee. It cost more than you thought it would. Come on." Dmitri accompanied Norman back to the change machine, grumbling. "Okay." 10 minutes to wait while coins collected in the dish of the change machine. Dmitri was getting on edge. Okay, we try again now." Norman took up his stand once more between locker 264 and the watching surveillance camera. Making sure he left enough room, it simply looked like Dmitri was having problems getting the automated payment system to take his ticket. In actuality, he was jimmying open the coin slot again. Okay, here's hoping. As idly as possible, Norman began depositing 20-cent pieces, as though he were a perfectly ordinary bloke, just helping out a friend, while the friend stood by watching, as though Dmitri was not, in fact, sweating bullets from having to maintain constant pressure to keep the coin slot open. 1 20-cent piece, a second 20-cent piece. Do you know how many we'll have to put in? I'm assuming 50 euros worth. Jesus, that was a lot of 20-cent pieces. A digitized screen beside the locker's coin slot began counting how much they'd paid. 60 cents, 80. I think it'll look suspicious if I just lean here for too long. But, after having only paid 2 euros, the lock clunked open. The digitized screen ran asterisks across its face to show entry had been successful. How long was this locker rented for? Stuff should have been in here for at least a week by now. Could they have rigged the system? I don't know. Norman sure hoped he had remembered the locker number correctly. 2 euros worth of luggage storage usually meant whoever had utilized the locker had only left less than an hour ago. There was no money inside, only a stack of papers. That relieved Norman. Documents. Rene had been right then. No average person left nothing but a manila folder and a luggage sleeve, right? The two men knew better than to show any interest in the contents of what was meant to look like a casual retrieval. They were lucky. The folder was easy to fold in half before Dmitri casually slipped it into his sewn-in front pocket. Both men felt relieved. That would save them some explanation, were the video of them together from the back corner of this hallway ever to surface inconveniently. Norman had taken nothing from Dmitri's supposed locker. All right. As per their prearranged agreement, Norman didn't cover his tracks by now pretending to put luggage of his own in a locker. Had he done so, this would have provided him with a plausible deniability Dmitri himself wouldn't have the luxury of falling back on. They walked out of the luggage leaf together, still chatting casually for the sake of the cameras. Locker 264 was left open, ready for its next user. Dmitri was a pro. Not even a scratch mark had been left behind. All right, once they had walked 2 blocks away from the train station and could be sure no exterior cameras would pick up their movements, Dmitri handed Norman the folder they'd taken from the locker. What is it? Come on. Norman motioned for them to turn down a side street so they could lean against the brick siding of a jeweler's store and be sure the wind wouldn't whip away any of the loose papers within the folder. Norman fumbled it open. It contained admittance forms to the high-security unit at Servways for a man named Robert Espinoze, who appeared to have gotten in a tussle at his last psychiatric facility over other patients refuting his claims that an influential uncle on the facility's board of directors had sent him the ticket to a luggage locker in West End train station, locker 236. What the? Norman turned the paperwork over to find a picture. It was Rene, only he didn't have a scar running alongside his left eye. So what's that mean? Dmitri was looking over one shoulder. He told me he got that scar in the struggle that led him to be admitted to the high-security unit. This struggle. Yes. Dmitri could read the circumstances of Robert Espinoze's admittance to Servways over Norman's shoulder. So, this has to be the paperwork that got Rene, my friend, admitted to the high-security unit, but it's the wrong name and there's no scar. Used a different name just to fuck with you? Took the picture from documents they'd drawn up on him before the fight? The picture's dated the same day as the form, though, 3 years prior to when Rene first arrived at Servways. Well, then he was lying about how he got the scar. You said yourself they don't tell you what the patients are in for. Patient tells you. They're bound to get a few things wrong. Maybe he was there for longer than he wanted to let you know. But Wade had said Rene hadn't been in the high-security unit long enough to get any mail. Wade had been under the impression Rene hadn't been in Servways for any great length of time, too. Of course, Norman couldn't be sure when Wade had been hired. Maybe Rene had been admitted to the high-security unit twice, once as Robert Espinoze, before Wade's time. Or maybe one of them's the clone. Norman shuffled through the rest of the paperwork, irritated. He'd told Dmitri about Francis's claims. That is your most likely bet, Dmitri joked. But Norman was still preoccupied. Why would he lie about how he got a scar? I can think of lots of reasons. He doesn't want you knowing he gets in fights while in the secure unit. He wants to sound more exciting. He probably got it slipping in the bathroom. That did sound like a possibility. This says he was admitted 3 years prior to when he claimed, though. Why would... It's craziness. It runs in the family, from what you said, no? It's possible. Norman had also told Dmitri about the run-in he'd had with Wilhelm Monado being forcibly removed to Fremont Lowell. Or, your friend stole this guy's story of why he was admitted. But there really was a ticket for Rene, like he always claimed, amongst his stuff, and his uncle didn't deny he'd sent him one. All right, so... You don't need to be sane to recognize a luggage ticket. So why send to anyone to begin with? To fuck with his nephew. Or nephews, I don't know. Dmitri was getting confused. But then why bother leaving this in the locker? It helps him get money, you said. Right, so then I'm guessing that implies Robert is actually Rene under a different name and the documents somehow pertain to Rene. A false identity. But why? Espinoze. Was that a legitimate relative of the father of whom Rene believed himself to be a bastard? Did Gottfried just straight up lie about no lookalikes in the family, and then send both this Robert and Rene separate tickets? Norman supposed bastards could be a sensitive topic, despite Gottfried's professed enlightened attitude about the subject. There was another admission form beneath the one that admitted Robert to Servways. The 7-6 Project, what is that? Clones? Dmitri gave Norman a sarcastic side-eye. Why leave this in a locker for your nephew, and then claim you put money? Because he's crazy. So Gottfried was crazy too now? Right, but what? Norman flipped back through the papers. I tell you, you start talking too long with them, it gets catching, you know. Trust me. I had a sister-in-law who tried to set me up for a pyramid scheme once. They start making sense about halfway through. It's how they get you on their side. They wear you down. I don't know. What hospital is this from? Admittance to Serveways had been signed by members of Wesley Crown Hospital for Psychiatric Services. That's the hospital Rene came from. So it's just Rene with a different name. They did cater to patients' requests to choose their own nicknames, but that didn't go so far as to allow for a different surname. Or it's two different men who aren't related but look identical. Admittance to the 7-6 Project had been signed by psychiatrists from Fremont Lowell. Why would you do this to yourself? Dimitri was actually enjoying watching Norman suffer over his own confusion. I know I saw, well, he supposed. I guess the man I saw at Fremont Lowell could have been this Robert. That would explain the use of the nickname Rookie, perhaps. Espinosa simply had a nickname Norman didn't recognize as Rene's because Robert Espinosa wasn't Rene. Just what the hell was his file doing in a luggage locker at West End? And why would he eat Rene's ticket, and why did he have an incident report identical to Rene's? Or, as Dimitri had suggested, identical to the incident report Rene claimed to have. Maybe Rene simply had been lying, using Robert's story instead of his own. But then how had he found out about the story behind Robert's admittance to Serveways? That was supposed to be strictly confidential, unless Robert himself told Rene, or Rene witnessed the struggle. But even then, to know Robert eventually landed in Serveways. Had it been the topic of a nice family chat? If Robert was part of the family of which Rene claimed himself a bastard, that was the same family that by their own admission, or at least by Godfrey's admission, habitually avoided visiting Rene. Perhaps, if Norman could find some prior connection between Robert and Rene, if indeed they were separate entities, perhaps then he would understand why Robert's folder was waiting for Rene at a train station as apparently a means to ensure Rene received money. That promise alone felt to Norman like an assurance of foul play that Robert's folder somehow brought to light. A promise to gain money by suing Serveways, perhaps. Norman pocketed the folder, folding it over and placing it in the right breast pocket he had sewn down the length of his jacket's interior. Now, to figure out what to do next. Chapter 13. For this round, in the idle game of pensioner versus state psychiatric facilities, Norman decided he needed the help of his old acquaintances at the police department, but Dimitri could still be of some help too. Despite the ankle monitor's limiting effects on his caprices, Dimitri still maintained a radio dialed in to pick up chatter from policemen's squad cars on the kitchen table of the dingy apartment he reluctantly allowed Norman to enter. Up at 212, I-9 12th, came through the radio. Then, I've got a man here says he's at a cousin's house. 1047, request permission. You're not supposed to be on those frequencies. Dimitri simply shrugged. Norman sat by the radio and started playing with its dials. Have you heard anything interesting recently? What do you mean? Armed break-ins? Fugitive sightings? Your buddies don't still complain to you about work problems? Norman had been the last of his buddies to retire, but even so, all police work was confidential. They wouldn't have been able to talk about it with him anyway. Well, Dimitri tried to remember. There was, I think, a break-in the other night, but it might also have been a hit and run. No, that won't work. Not dangerous enough. They sat listening for a while. 1038, maybe requested suspect, Patterson. Patterson, what's that? Oh, he was in the paper too, though. Shot up a hotel lobby trying to get away with the till's cash. And he's still at large? They say he's difficult to track for some reason. Do you have the paper? I might have left it out. Dimitri went to search as Norman tried to zero back in on the sound of the dispatchers, now warbling through Dimitri's receiver. Dimitri returned with the newspaper. Richard Patterson, still wanted in connection with a non-lethal shooting last Saturday. Last Saturday? See, I told you, this guy's good. It didn't usually take the police that long to hunt someone down. Not where Norman and Dimitri lived. It was too small. Village life was too transparent to hide a running convict long. Yes, all right, Patterson could work. What are you going to do? I'm going to ask if my old boss can do me a favor. To try to find the clones. Yeah, to try to find the clones. Dimitri had been compensated 200 euros for his services at the luggage leave, but the file on Espinosa hadn't been the sort of thing he'd been expecting to find in that locker. It was enough to arouse his curiosity. You'll keep me informed, whatever happens, you bet. The answers to whatever was going on between the nearly identical Rene and Robert would undoubtedly be found at Wesley Crown Hospital. They had both been admitted to the Serveways high-security unit from there. But Norman no longer had the authority he needed to ask hospitals to turn over confidential patient documentation. For that, he needed a warrant, and a valid reason for wishing to visit the psychiatric center. Luckily, valid reasons were easy enough to manufacture. He arrived at the office his old boss had moved into the next morning, around 9 o'clock. Rita Sanis had climbed to division head at Norman's old department about 5 years before union stipulations required Norman to drop slowly out of active service and into the boredom he now found as a pensioner. She was small, sharp, and brutish, but intelligently so, and she smoked when she thought no one was looking. If Norman had thought it would be hard to sweet-talk Gottfried into giving up information, convincing Rita to lend him a hand would be even more difficult. "Hey, boss, Saw you with Dmitri Mendel the other night." She was smoking in her office, but Norman was technically on a social call, being retired, so she didn't mind him witnessing. "Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Shit. Where had she seen them together? "He, tipped me off about this fellow named Avon Patterson." "Oh?" "Apparently he's got a job running opiates from a nearby hospital." Norman's accusations against Patterson, of course, once found false, wouldn't stick to the guy's record unfairly. "I read in the papers he's on the run. Figured running opiates could be how he keeps out of custody so efficiently. He must be using it to finance himself, stay mobile." "All right." Rita looked like she could like this angle. Her department had very few leads on Patterson. Norman had asked around, just casually interested, before he entered her office. Confidentiality about police matters was still in place, of course, but an old, friendly face still learned a few things. Norman could only hope he could supply fabricated details about Patterson's non-existent drug smuggling that were vague enough they didn't accidentally contradict something Rita's team had already discovered about the fugitive. Also, now that he'd sidestepped explaining what he'd been doing with a known safe-breaker, he needed to find a subtle way to imply Dmitri wasn't affiliated in any way with this Patterson fellow. Wouldn't do to land him in the soup after he'd done Norman a good turn. "So, what Dmitri heard, from a friend who works at this hospital, is that Patterson's got an associate on the inside, locked away in the place. It's a psych ward, for depression or something. Anyway, he supplies the opiates every Wednesday. He breaks into the dispensary? Or something. I mean, it's not exact, but it's good information. Dmitri says his friend's on the level. He's worried about losing his job, just doesn't want this Patterson to know he brought in police, you know?" "And the contents of the locker you were seen breaking into? What was in there?" "Locker? What locker?" Norman tried to play innocent. "You were seen breaking into a locker at West End Station, 4 a.m., just 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, because, to Norman's chagrin, he knew he needed a night in between the caper and returning to his old precinct, to make sure he was rested for the upcoming ruse he meant to employ. He was getting old. But being honest with himself about his own limitations was paying off now. He was alert enough to counter quickly. There wasn't anything in the locker, can't bust a guy for stealing nothing. Damage to public property? It wasn't damaged. He said he'd lost his ticket, he opened it, wasn't anything in it, so I figured I'd let him go. But the fact I was there is the reason I guarantee why I've got such good information now. He didn't know I've retired, see? And he just walked right out of there, after his first attempt failed. I mean, what else was he supposed to do? He didn't know I was retired, I walked out with him. Figured I'd give him a second chance. We had a bit of a talk afterwards." "All right." Rita stamped out her cigarette. She supposed that tallied with what little she knew of Norman's movements from the CCTV cameras that evening. She wasn't concerned enough to double-check if he returned to collect his own bags later. She trusted him. He'd been a good cop. "So, will you let me track the lead he gave? I don't want to waste police time, but I could check it out myself. Please, just for old times' sake." "I'm not stopping you. There was no law that said retired inspectors couldn't play private detective." "I need help." "Oh, that kind of help. Search warrants." So that's what he was hoping to gain, by coming back here to be chummy at 9 a.m. by the coffee machine with what few old colleagues still remembered him. Norman. "No, now listen, I've got a description of the guy, and I know what hospital he works out of. I just need a name." "The guy? The opiates guy, the guy who supplies Patterson with opiates." It had been a few years since Norman had needed to make an official presentation to superior officers. He was getting a bit ahead of himself. But his lie seemed to be holding up pretty well. "All right," Rita's eyebrows seemed to say, "keep talking. All I've got to do is ask if they've got anyone at the hospital filing under the description Dmitri gave. I just, need someone with a badge to make it look official. Where does he work out of, the opiates guy?" "Wesley Crown Hospital for Psychiatric Services." "Huh." The name seemed to strike Rita as something of interest. "And what's his description?" "Got violent enough to be sent to a high-security unit for 3 weeks." Well, Jesus, that could be anybody. 3 weeks was the minimum standard evaluators could request when filling out paperwork to get a patient transferred. Any time Espinosa spent at Servways after those 3 weeks would require new paperwork. That paperwork, if it existed, hadn't been in the folder. They've only got a population of 50 men up at Servways. Chances 2 of them came from the same psych ward would be pretty slim. Usually they came through the prison system. Oh, that's right, you do that reading with the Visitor Volunteer and Listen program. Yeah, all right. I'll lend you out a sergeant and a search warrant. I hope you're onto something. This guy's been leading us on wild goose chases for about a month now. Well, Norman thought, then surely one more wild goose chase wouldn't hurt, right?